Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for HCM Skills for the Skilled Labor Manager. My name is Rachel Yanchis, and I'm a Vertical Marketing Specialist at Viventium. We are excited to have our Senior Manager of Research and Development, Yonina Shineweather, and our Senior Director of Product Management, Zishe Glauber, this afternoon as we learn about some commonly known and less known nuances of the skilled labor industry. Yonina is a CPA with 26 years of HCM experience, and Zishe has been with the company for 7 years in roles ranging from implementation to product management. Before I hand this over to Yonina, I want you to know that we value your feedback from this session, and we look forward to sharing with you more insights that will help you grow your business successfully. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to use your question feature on your toolbar to type them in so our presenters can address them at the end if there is time. For more information on our unique offering for our industry, check out www.viventium.com/industries-skilled-labor. Yonina, we're looking forward to this session, and I'll hand it over to you to get started.
Thank you so much, Rachel, and I'm happy to be presenting together with you, Zishe, today. Today's webinar is HCM Skills for the Skilled Labor Manager. Now, skilled labor, as we're going to talk about, is probably one of the most regulated industries if the contracts are for any type of a city, state, school district, or federal contractor, on the one hand. And it may also be one of the more difficult from an HCM standpoint to manage type of industry because there's typically very high workers' compensation expenses. There's a lot of management in terms of workplace safety and OSHA regulations, may have high turnover, and some of the nuances of this industry are going to be the focus of our webinar today. We're also going to be taking a look at how Viventium's tools and solutions can give insight to you as a skilled labor manager, whether it's being in charge of a company or being in charge of the payroll HR side of the company, managing the scheduling and the various challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis. Before I get started, a couple of administrative points. Today's webinar, the compliance section of today's webinar is being recorded. The recording will be available for future viewing and listening on our Viventium.com website. In addition, you have the handout attached. If you take a look at your GoToWebinar toolbar, there's a handout section, and today's slides are uploaded there in PDF format, so you can always use that to refer back to. If you have any questions, I always encourage participants to ask questions as we go along. Usually, if something I've said or haven't said is inspiring you to ask a question, probably other people will share that same question. So if you're brave enough to be the one to ask, that's a benefit to everybody. You can ask a question by using the questions section on your toolbar, on your GoToWebinar toolbar, and I do keep my eye on that toolbar as we go along, so if there's anything there, I will try to incorporate it in the presentation. If we have any time left at the end, I will try to have a Q&A session as well. Now, basically, the way today's webinar is going to be structured is I'm going to be doing a compliance part at the beginning, and that will be followed by a software tour of hands-on in Viventium by Zishe. Okay, so without any further ado, let's get started by taking a look at how Viventium is in it with our clients in skilled labor. In these various nuances of the skilled labor industry. First of all, multiple pay rates. As you know, you can have the same type of worker working on more than one contract and getting a different pay rate. You might have a journeyman doing electric wiring work in one contract, and the contracted rate there may be different than in a different contract. At the same time, you may have one worker doing multiple types of work. You might have someone doing some iron work and at the same time doing some other type of construction work where he's paid a different rate. And so question is, how do you pay the same person a multiple pay rate? We'll be able to see that during the software tour. That's one of the features Zishe will be able to show you, is how you can set up multiple pay rates for the same employee. Labor cost distribution, and we'll talk about that in a minute. If you want to break down your payroll costs across various contracts, or perhaps across multiple projects for the same contract. And if you also want to break it down by type of work, again, for electric, for iron work, for cement pouring, across one project and across multiple projects for the same contract, how can you do that? OSHA issues, occupational safety, how can you meet your compliance requirements, your posting requirements, your various reporting the log, we'll talk about that as well, poster requirements, union deductions, again, this is a highly unionized industry, and various unions have required reports with special formats in them, and that's something that Viventium does provide to you, the full range of the various unions and their union reports. Certified payroll, now that's a biggie for those of you who do any type of government contracting, school district, school board contracting, and one of the probably the most unique feature that Viventium can offer for your industry, for skilled labor, is not just data that you can kind of put together a certified report with, but an actual compliant weekly copy of your certified payroll report that you need to meet your prevailing wage requirements, a report that is compliant for the WH-347, which we'll talk about, and that you can actually use to report to the authorities that you have to report it to. Workers' compensation, again, that's one of the highest expenses besides payroll in the skilled labor industry because of the types of work that generally tends to be done, and what can Viventium do to help you control and track and gain insight into your workers' compensation costs, paid time off and how to management, and finally we'll wind up with a little bit about garnishments and the types of garnishments that you may be responsible for collecting from your employees' pay and how Viventium can automate that for you. So jumping over to the right side of our slide, Viventium can automate your multiple pay rates, and that's something you'll see hands-on in Zishe's software tour later. Maintaining OSHA compliance data on the employee level, as is required. Customizing your union reports, your accruals. Of course, complying with your certified payroll requirements, drilling down into expense per contract with the multi-level cost centers, accessing single sign-on from any browser, anywhere, even on your phone at any time to your Viventium data, Viventium application, and tracking and automating work opportunity tax credits eligibility, how you can actually put that to work for you if you hire eligible employees. Viventium includes a free screening to see if someone is WOTC eligible. And so let's begin with our discussion of multiple pay rates. Here on the left-hand side, we have an example. Jamie worked on the contract for PS 105 in the Bronx 35 hours this week. He also worked 5 hours on a Department of Defense office expansion project in Manhattan. Both of these projects require prevailing wage. Now, a word about prevailing wage, we'll talk about that in a little more, but generally speaking, federal contracts, state and city contracts are going to require you to be paying the prevailing wage to your employees. And then you have the same employee worked another 3 hours on a project for Intel Corporation, which is obviously not a government project, that's a private project. How can Jamie's employer automate his payroll calculation? So what we're going to see a little bit later during the software tour, but in Viventium, pay rate descriptions are customizable. So for example, if you would like to have 3 different pay rates for our worker here, Jamie, one would be called perhaps prevailing wage PS 105. That could be the name of a rate, so that when you can set that rate on the employee level, so that anytime he works on this project, you can select the prevailing wage code and the rate will automatically come up. Similarly, if you're working on a different prevailing wage project, you could have a different rate and it could be labeled prevailing wage DoD project. These are customizable descriptions, and you can also on the employee level just type in the rate, and then every time he works on these projects, you don't have to type in the rate all over again. You just pick the description and the rate will automatically pop up. And similarly, if he has a private project and you're just going to give him whatever particular rate he's getting on that project, you would just give that a label private rate, or private industry rate, as the case may be, or non-prevailing wage rate. And it's very simple to select that and to just pay him at that rate without having to enter the rate each time that he's working hours on a particular project. What about multi-level cost distributions? All right, let's imagine this. Perhaps you're billing owners for multiple building services, or perhaps let's say you have a contract with a number of different building projects, and you want to show how much did you spend on ironwork on a particular project, or how much did you spend on the electric wiring in a particular project. You don't have to start doing analyses on an Excel spreadsheet, making columns, rows. All you need to do in Viventium is set up a cost center. You could set up a separate cost center for each project. If you have multiple projects within one contract, you can have a cost center for each project, and then you can embed that as a lower level cost center into a contract. So for example, if we have let's say we call it Board of Ed contract, and within that Board of Ed contract, you're working on 3 different school building projects. You can have one cost center on the Board of Ed level, and then 3 sub-cost centers on each public school project, on each public school works, and then you can pull out, and then within each public school, you can have each type of work. So let's say it's ironwork, electrical, cement, bricklaying, whatever the particular expense is for that particular public school. And then you can drill down any way you want. Viventium has something called business intelligence, which allows you to play around with all of these cost centers. So let's say I want to see all the work done on bricklaying for 2 out of my 5 schools that I'm doing under this contract. You can see that just at the click of a button. Let's say I want to see for a particular school all of the expenses, the bricklaying plus the electric plus the plumbing plus whatever other expenses I may have been doing construction on. You can do that. You can just query to see for this particular school contract how much was the entire payroll expense. See, and you get the idea. You can really, the sky's the limit in terms of the combinations and permutations that you can set up for multi-level cost distributions. But we'll actually take a look at that a little bit later when we do the software tour, and we're going to go live into the software and see how you can put this type of analytics to work for you. The next thing. Well, here's another example that might be a little more relevant for construction. If we have, let's say, contract number 567, and that has maybe a 45th Street project, a 46th Street project, and a 47th Street project, just by way of example. I want to know how much did I spend total payroll cost on all projects on this contract. That will be like the highest level. Then I might want to drill down, how much did I spend on the concrete part for just the 45th Street project? So in other words, if you're billing for multiple projects and you need to show the total of specific services for all projects, Viventium's business intelligence would give you the ability, by using cost centers, to be able to query on that. What about the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, otherwise known as OSHA? Well, we know OSHA is a department of the United States Department of Labor. It's administered by Department of Labor. Why do we talk about OSHA when it comes to construction? OSHA applies to almost all employers and almost all industries across the board. It's not just for construction work. However, since OSHA is particularly concerned with responsibilities of providing a safe workplace, and skilled labor in construction generally carry various degrees of danger in the workplace, OSHA becomes a special focus for the industry of skilled labor. Now, what are the OSHA requirements? Well, in the big picture is that, of course, employers are responsible to provide a safe workplace. Safe workplace doesn't just mean having safe equipment and safe tools, although that's part of it. It means providing safety training in a language that employees understand. So if your workforce is not English speaking, you need to provide it in a language they will understand. And you need to track when each employee had his last safety training course. Viventium allows you to do that on the employee level. We can have a record of dates for the employee, the name of the course that he took, when he took the course last. You can have a reminder on the employee level when he's due for his next safety training session. All of this is easily implementable, and you can also make it available to the employees through their employee self-service, so they themselves can see when their next training is scheduled. And that's all part of OSHA compliance. In addition, OSHA requires posting. It's important, it's required to post the OSHA poster that displays employees' rights and responsibilities. And Viventium's poster service gives you all the poster services that you need. In addition to just posting employees' rights and responsibilities, though, you're also mandated by OSHA to keep records of any type of work-related injury or work-related illness. And that record, again, can be kept within the employee's file in Viventium. You'll see when we go into the software tour that there is an employee profile. In that employee profile, you can store important dates and important events in the course of the employee's employment, including any type of work-related injuries. And that information is there and is stored so that if you're ever asked to show it in any type of a DOL audit, Department of Labor audit, you would have that information at your fingertips ready to go. Not only does that have to be kept on the employee level, but there has to be a log of work-related injuries that is actually accessible to employees. With the summary of this work-related injury log has to be posted for 3 months. To do that, you can use OSHA Form 300, and the link is right here on your slide. We'll click on that just to take a look. Remember, this session is being recorded, so you can always go back and refer back to the information. But this is obviously the DOL's OSHA site, and here's where you have the Forms 300 series. Some of them are fill-outable forms, and this can be used as the mandated summary for keeping track of your employees' work-related injuries. This can also be uploaded. The Form 300 can also be scanned and uploaded into Viventium. So more than just payroll, Viventium gives you a place to keep the employee records that you need. There are parts of Viventium where you can scan documents and store them on the employee's level so that you have any type of log backup information that you want to be able to keep. And also keep in mind that there are some states that, in addition to, as OSHA, all states are required to have at least the same requirements as the federal government in place for OSHA, for workplace safety. They're required to have, so to speak, an at least plan. So the states in the immediate environment, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, all do have OSHA-approved state at least plans. It's necessary, and we advise you to check your state safety requirements in addition to the OSHA ones. Some states will have high requirements, require more frequent safety training, more frequent tool inspection. And so this is, again, our client services specialist can help advise you with this, but we do encourage all of our clients to, bone up on not only their OSHA requirements, but their particular state safety plan requirements as well. And that brings us to our next issue, which is certified payroll. The human side behind certified payroll, I always try to encourage, at Viventium, we think of this very much as a holistic HCM management approach to payroll. Management means like, okay, what do I have to do and when do I have to do it by? That's the management side, which we certainly do support our clients on. In addition, there's this C, the HCM, the human capital management, the business side of it. We recognize that payroll is not just numbers and figures and multiplying taxes. There's also a business side to it. There are sometimes more than one way to manage payroll compliance, and we try to help you get that insight into, well, what's best for my bottom line? What's the capital side? What's the business side about this? And then we also try to encourage our clients and our internal clients, our employees alike, to look at the human side of it. And when we approach something in a compliance setting, we don't just think of how to do it best for our bottom line, but what's the human side? What's really going on here? Why are we faced with this type of a compliance challenge? So when we talk about certified payroll or prevailing wage, let's understand the human side of it, the whys and the wherefores. What is this all about? The federal government, state and local governments, school districts obviously are not going to do all of their own construction or skilled labor work. They're going to contract it out to private industry, to private contractors, such as those participating in our webinar today. And they're going to ask them to make a bid for a particular contract. Board of Ed wants to add a wing to a local school. They're going to send it out to contractors and say, okay, request for proposal. Give us your bid, and we'll evaluate your bid and all the different aspects of it, and we'll pick a contractor. So it would be very tempting for a contractor who's bidding for a public works contract to try to kind of lowball his bid by cutting down on costs as much as possible. And the government, the various government jurisdictions, are afraid they don't want contractors to be lowballing their bids at the detriment of their workers. In other words, we're going to pay real low wage, and that's how we'll be able to contain our costs and come out ahead and put in the lowest bid possible, get the contract. And meanwhile, we'll pay our workers minimum wage, let's say. That's against social interest. And therefore, most government or quasi-government bodies, certainly the federal government, when they award contracts to private contractors, require them to pay at least what's called prevailing wage to their employees. And prevailing wage varies depending on if it's an apprentice or a journey worker, depending on where the work is being done, what state, location. It could even, for example, in New York, the prevailing wage can be different by county. It depends on the job description, depends on the type of work being done, and there are various rates, and these rates are published. They're available to the public. I'm sure those of you who do government contracting are well aware of them. But not only do you have to pay the prevailing wage, you also have to track and report weekly on a certified payroll report your compliance with prevailing wage. And of course, that can be done using Federal Form WH-347. You have a link to it over here. On the left-hand side, you have a little copy of what that form looks like. It's a weekly report. It has the in and out times, hours of each employee, the wages, the benefits, all the different types of pay that they're getting. Some states, some jurisdictions may require electronic filing of the certified payroll reports. And Viventium is in it with you. Viventium is there for you, whereas other payroll services may just give you information on a report or give you a spitback of the hours that you've given in and just, okay, now you go ahead and run with it and produce your own certified payroll reports. Viventium gives you this. Viventium gives you a certified payroll report compliant with the Federal Form 347, the WH-347, that meets all of the reporting requirements that are necessary to meet your government contracting and that are submitted with requisition for payment. So let's just take a look for a minute. This is just a sample company, Bedrock Construction, Inc., and it's set in New York. And here we have for a week ending, this is the kind of report you would get each week with your payroll for the week ending of April 22nd. We're talking about the project called Atlantic City Boardwalk. It's an exciting project. And we have the identifying information for each employee, their name, address, and social. And the social is masked. Only the last 4 digits are showing to avoid identity theft issues. You have the type of work being done, carpenter, journeyman, laborer, etc. And you have their time in and out each day, and here are the days with the dates on them, Sunday the 16th, Monday the 17th, etc. How many hours they worked at each rate, whether it's regular, overtime, etc. Would show there the total hours, the base rate of pay per hour, and their total base pay. And in addition to, if there's a union amount, we see the union. The local number can appear on there too if you give us that data. The gross pay, their taxes and other deductions, and their net pay. In other words, exactly all the information that's required, and this service is only with Viventium. Can you get a ready-to-file certified payroll report? That's a way that Viventium is in it with clients. Any questions on certified payroll before we go on? Okay. Let's talk about another biggie for skilled labor, which is workers' compensation. Again, all industries have workers' compensation. It's just because of the tenuous nature, the somewhat dangerous nature of work done usually by skilled laborers, that workers' compensation becomes a bigger piece of the HCM expense, of the payroll and HR expense. Workers' compensation has sometimes been called the compensation bargain because in the olden days, before there was workers' compensation insurance, if an employee would be injured on the job and choose to sue his employer for negligence, contributory negligence, willful, any type of liability for an injury on the job, that employer was subject to a full suit for the full amount of damage, just like any individual would be. And employers stood to lose hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on liability suits. A compensation bargain was struck with the idea of workers' compensation, and that is, instead of having individual liability on the part of each employer for his workers' injuries, we're going to have something called collective liability, meaning every employer in the state, according to how dangerous the work is going to pay in insurance premiums. And all of those insurance premiums are going to go into a pool. And when a worker is injured on the job, he will not be able to sue his employer under most cases. Instead, he will collect his workers' compensation insurance. So collective liability is a way of granting individual immunity to employers themselves. The idea of workers' compensation is to provide wage replacement, rehabilitation benefits to workers who are injured on the job, and each state administers its own workers' compensation policies and regulations. Just to give you an idea why this is a special significance to the skilled labor industry, according to a Bureau of Labor Statistics survey from 2010, look at what percentage of employer cost workers' compensation represents in various industries. Just in the service industry, lawyers and accountants sitting behind desks, the workers' comp is 1.3% of employer cost. In manufacturing, it's slightly higher, 1.8%, and when we get to the construction industry, it's 4.4%. So it really jumps there. And therefore, it's important for our employers, our clients, to understand their workers' compensation requirements and how they can look at it also from a capital standpoint to benefit their bottom line. Most states will permit self-insurance. Now, whether a self-insurance is right or not for your company is, of course, something that has to be decided by your management in conjunction with your CPA lawyer advisors, but Viventium can try to give you at least the insight in terms of dollars and cents that you need. If you've had workers' comp and you've been on Viventium for a year or more, you can use Viventium's business intelligence tool to analyze how much you are paying in insurance for each of your departments, because the rate will vary depending on the type of work, depending on your departments. And you can compare that to what the cost would be of self-insuring and paying your own workers' comp claims. That's just one way that you can get insight from Viventium. The basic way that workers' comp works, of course, is that you take subject payroll, whatever that is, we'll define that in a minute, but you take workers' compensation subject payroll for each category, whether it's administrative, construction, there's categories for each type of work, times whatever the rate is assigned to that category, and then times a risk factor. Your company may have an individual risk factor that may be different based on past experience. Again, this is information that your workers' comp provider is going to be able to give you. And workers' comp is usually calculated as in one of two ways. Either it's estimated at the beginning of the year. In other words, for your, let's see, you have 5 different departments: electricity, concrete, bricklaying, ironwork, and administrative. For all those 5, you're going to get, and based on previous years, your workers' comp carrier will estimate how much your payroll is going to be, or how much your subject payroll is going to be, and then multiply that by the rates and the risk factors for each one of those departments and assess you an estimated premium. And then at the end of the year, after you've paid in the money, there's some type, or periodically during the year, there's some type of a reconciliation. That's the way it's generally done, and you can be sure if your insurance provider is doing that way, it's to the benefit of the insurance provider, not to the benefit of the employer. There is another way, a pay-as-you-go system. Instead of having this estimate at the beginning and then truing up later, which is always going to be to your detriment, you can actually just pay in your workers' comp as you go with the actual incurrence of your payroll. In other words, as you incur electric, iron, administrative, bricklaying. As you incur payroll in each of these departments, each week you will be paying in workers' comp as you go, and pay-as-you-go for workers' comp is a service that Viventium offers. It's also important to be aware that your premiums may get, just like you could be increased by a risk factor, your premiums can actually be reduced if you enroll in certain safety training programs. New York offers that option. Again, Viventium can make you aware of what these options are so that you just have greater insight into what you can possibly do to reduce your workers' comp costs. And then a word about subject payroll. Not all dollars paid to employees are subject to workers' compensation. Every state has its own definition, but for example, New York and New Jersey, paid time off is going to be subject. In other words, even if you pay vacation, holiday to your employees for time they don't work, you still have to pay workers' comp on that. But third-party sick pay, on the other hand, is exempt. So now on your Viventium workers' comps reports, each earnings code can be set up either as subject or exempt. And then when we will give you the workers' comp report that you can use for assistance in your workers' comp in your annual audit, or if you use pay-as-you-go, only those codes that are subject to workers' comp in your particular state are the ones that are going to go into the workers' comp wage. And by the way, if you do payroll across states, it can be set up separately so that in one state, third-party sick pay can be marked as exempt from workers' comp. In another state, if it's necessary, it can be marked as subject. Viventium gives you that flexibility. So, for example, commissions, bonus, tools, allowance, all that stuff. It's kind of surprising the tool allowance should be subject to workers' comp, but it is. That's what New York says. But overtime is not. So if an employee works 45 hours, he's only going to be subject, you're only going to have to pay workers' comp for him on those 45 hours at his regular rate. The 40 is obviously only the regular rate, but the extra 5 hours, even though you may be paying him time and a half or perhaps even more, you don't have to pay workers' comp on that overtime premium. And again, the Viventium workers' comp reports will take that out for you, and that you'll only see this actual workers' comp subject wage for you to pay tax on. What about PTO? We mentioned it a minute ago. Is it subject to workers' comp, and isn't it? But what about accruals? Sometimes companies can have very interesting type of PTO accruals. They can be based on tenure. For example, after you work for a company for a year, you're going to get off so much time for, every 8 hours or every 40 hours that you work. After 2 years, the schedule may be different. It could be a complex table, as complex as you want. If you can dream the pay time off scheme, we can accrue it for you. If you want to have a use it or lose it rule, where employees have to use up their PTO by the end of the year, or they just start again, it gets zeroed out, that's fine, we can do it for you. If you want to have a use it or lose a percentage of it, for example, use it up this year, or we're only going to carry over 10% or 20% to next year. Of course, Viventium will set up accruals for you that are compliant with state and local pay time off leaves, and that's a trend now across the country, not just in New York. More and more states and more localities are enacting paid time off requirements, where you have to accrue for every certain number of hours worked, a certain number of paid time off, or at least sick leave to be used for sick leave. And various states also have various versions of use it or lose it. Some states will say, you can carry over 20 hours till next year. Some will say 40 hours till next year. Viventium can accrue any of these formulas, and as many as you need. If you're in all 50 states, we can accrue as many paid time off formulas as there are. Sometimes you want to have additional PTO over and above the state and local mandatory sick pay, so you can have multiple accruals even within the same state, the same department. And you can also choose if you want the balance of your accruals to be shown on the employee stub or not. Now, again, in some states, the paid time off must be shown on the employee stub. Additional PTO is not necessarily required to be, so that's a management decision. And Viventium has full flexibility in terms of it can certainly show on your own payroll reports, and then whether or not you want it to show on the employee's pay statement is something that you can customize. Before we hand it over to Zishe for our software tour to actually see some of the great features and how all of this would work, some of the stuff we've been talking about, I want to spend just a moment or two on garnishments. If an employee is working for your company and you get a garnishment order, what do you do? Well, there's some things you can do and there's some things you can't do. The first thing you can't do is fire the employee. You can't say, oh, this is too much trouble. I don't want to be bothered with garnishments. What does this mean about the employee? You can't take disciplinary action against the employee for one garnishment. Generally, it's also important to know how to prioritize the garnishment. So a garnishment simply means to garnish, to collect debts out of an employee's wage. There's a third party out there who's gotten frustrated about trying to get the money from the employee voluntarily. So they go to one type of a court or another, and they get an order placed on the employee's wage. It could be child support, where the delinquent parent has not been paying the support. There may be an arrearage amount, which is a support due for more than 12 weeks, and that's they're given more leeway about how much money they can take out for that. Or it may be a current amount that they're just not paying. Or it could be a creditor garnishment. A creditor garnishment means your employee went to IKEA, for example, and bought a sofa and didn't finish paying it off and has just defaulted on their credit card payments. So IKEA or the credit card company is going to hire a collection agency that is eventually going to work its way through the court system and get a garnishment placed on a creditor garnishment placed on the employee's wages. You might also get something called a tax levy from the IRS or from state and local agencies. Tax levies are used by the state or the federal government to collect overdue taxes from wages, and they work a little differently than garnishments. Garnishments basically tell you, we hereby command you to take off $50 from this employee's wage per week. That's a garnishment. A tax levy says, give us all the money you've got in your hands for this employee until their levy's satisfied, except for X amount of dollars that they're allowed to go home with, and that's usually a function of a table based on their marital status and their number of exemptions. Just give us everything except for, like, the bone we'll throw to them to let them go home with this amount of pay. So a tax levy is give everything over to the jurisdiction except for, whereas a garnishment is, okay, just give us a little piece of the employee's pay. That's different, the difference between them. And there's legalities here that Viventium supports in terms of how much of an employee's disposable income can be garnished. There are various limits depending on the type of garnishment. If the employee is supporting a family now, another family, 50%, 55%, 60, 65, was there an arrearage, wasn't there an arrearage? All these percentages are based on disposable income, which is the employee's gross minus their taxes and any mandatory deductions that have to be coming out. And the support orders that you get will state all of this. As soon as you would get a support order, you'd send it right over to your client services rep, and they would help you set up the garnishment in a compliant way. It's not the kind of thing you can ignore either. If you get a garnishment, you can't just say, I don't want to be bothered. If you do get it, it is a court order that you do have to comply with. And the rules and regulations about garnishments are controlled by something called the CCPA, the Consumer Credit Protection Act. Our specialists at Viventium are familiar with the provisions of the CCPA, the limits, what you are allowed to take, what's called disposable income. What happens if there's multiple garnishments going on? Well, any tax levy that's in existence already before anything else comes in always gets priority. After that, child support orders get priority over creditor garnishments, which kind of makes sense because, a person's children should probably get priority over IKEA or their credit card company. So this is the human side of it. It's logical. And in the Viventium system, you can prioritize garnishments. You can arrange them in the order that you want them to be coming off. If you wanted to have multiple garnishments coming, sometimes an employer will just give a wage assignment, which means he wants his wages to go somewhere to pay off a sofa bill or a credit card bill. It's not a garnishment. He can assign what percentage of, maybe he wants to be paying off 2 bills at the same time, so you can do them simultaneously, a different percentage to each, 60% or 40% of whatever amount he designates, or you can first have one satisfied and then go on to deduct the other. You can line them up in line, waiting to be deducted. So these are all elements of flexibility. Those of you who are already working with the Viventium system, if I have any existing clients here today, and those of you who have not yet started working with Viventium is probably the most flexible application for HCM that you've ever met, and therefore to give you a little bit of a chance to see what I'm talking about, I'm going to ask Zishe. I'm going to be giving over the control to Zishe in a minute. Zishe is our expert in anything pertaining to Viventium, and he's been giving software tours to clients, explaining to them the nuances of Viventium for quite a while now. He'll be, I think, a very interesting software tour to take a look at the features. I want to leave you with one thought. We all know that in life, hard work beats talent, which is true, and you to kind of think about it. You can have talented people, but if you don't have hard work there, it's not going to get them very far. At Viventium, our motto is hard work meets talent, and that is a remarkable combination. And so with no further ado, Zishe, I'm going to make you presenter so that you can begin to show us the features